The morning sun hadn't even peeked over the horizon when Mrs. Taylor pulled into the empty parking lot of Crystal Clear Corp. Her old Honda Civic, which had faithfully served her for over a decade, made a familiar crunch on the gravel as she parked in her usual spot, far from the shiny BMWs and Mercedes that would fill the executive spaces in a few hours. She grabbed her worn backpack, filled with not just cleaning supplies but also her textbooks. Nobody at work knew that after her shifts, she'd head straight to the local library to study. For the past 6 years, she'd been quietly working toward her business degree, paying for it with every spare dollar she could save. The security guard, Mr. Chen, gave her his usual friendly nod as she badged in. He was one of the few people who treated her like a human being rather than part of the building's furniture. "Another early morning, huh?" he said with a warm smile. They shared a brief chat about his daughter's recent college acceptance, the kind of conversation that reminded her why she kept pushing forward with her own education. The office was eerily quiet at this hour, just how she liked it. The only sounds were the soft hum of the air conditioning and the squeaking of her cleaning cart's wheels against the polished floor. She'd been walking these halls for 15 years, watching others climb the corporate ladder while she remained invisible to most. But Mrs. Taylor wasn't just cleaning, she was learning. Every morning, as she dusted the desks and emptied the trash bins, she studied the sticky notes, the meeting schedules on whiteboards, the documents carelessly left on desks. She understood the company's rhythms better than most managers did. She knew which departments were struggling, which teams were thriving, and most importantly, where money was being wasted. Today, she started with the executive floor, as always. The morning light was just beginning to cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she methodically worked her way through each office. She couldn't help but notice the new organizational charts pinned to the CEO's bulletin board. Another round of promotions that hadn't considered any of the hardworking support staff. As she cleaned the conference room, she overheard 2 early bird executives discussing the company's biggest client. They didn't even pause their conversation as she entered. She was invisible to them, after all. Their words caught her attention. The client was unhappy, threatening to pull their $1 million contract. The executives sounded worried, but clueless about how to fix the mounting problems. Mrs. Taylor kept her head down, but her mind was racing. She'd seen this coming months ago. The new cleaning protocols they'd implemented were cutting corners, leaving offices below standard. She documented everything. The reduced cleaning hours, the cheaper supplies, the skipped deep cleaning sessions. More importantly, she had ideas, lots of them, about how to fix things. Back in the janitor's closet, between tasks, she pulled out her worn notebook. In it were years of observations, ideas, and detailed notes about how to run a cleaning operation properly. She'd seen every mistake the company had made, watched every failed attempt at improvement, and silently crafted better solutions. Little did they know that the woman they barely noticed, the one they walked past without a glance, was about to change everything. Mrs. Taylor smiled to herself as she tucked the notebook away and pushed her cart toward the next section of offices. The sun was fully up now, and soon the halls would fill with busy employees. She had just a few more hours to finish her rounds, and to perfect the plan she'd been working on for years. The morning rush would start soon, and with it would come the usual mix of ignored greetings and overlooked spills for her to clean. But today felt different. Maybe it was time to put her hard-earned knowledge to use. After all, she hadn't spent 6 years studying business just to push a cleaning cart forever. It was another busy Wednesday at Crystal Clear Corp when everything changed. Mrs. Taylor was quietly wiping down the windows in the hallway outside the main conference room, where the weekly executive meeting was running longer than usual. The thick wooden door didn't quite muffle the loud voices inside. "Did you see her cleaning the break room earlier?" One voice carried through. "These people just don't understand how a professional office works." Laughter followed, making Mrs. Taylor's hand pause mid-wipe. She'd grown used to being invisible, but this was different. "Well, what do you expect?" Another voice chimed in. I mean, look at who we hire for these jobs. My cousin runs a cleaning company with proper staff, you know, the right kind of people." More chuckles filled the room. Mrs. Taylor's grip tightened on her cleaning cloth, but her face remained calm. 20 feet away, young Mr. Thompson from accounting gave her an apologetic look. He could hear it too. She gave him a small smile and continued working. Let them talk, she thought. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the CFO's office, she noticed a spreadsheet left open on his computer screen. The numbers confirmed what she'd suspected. The company was bleeding money through inefficient cleaning contracts and poor resource management. The very things they mocked her about were the things they couldn't handle themselves. During her lunch break, sitting alone in the small break room where the cleaning staff ate, Mrs. Taylor pulled out her worn laptop. She'd been taking online business classes during every spare moment, early mornings, lunch breaks, late nights after her kids were asleep. Today's lesson was about corporate restructuring, and she couldn't help but smile at the irony. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter about making the dean's list at community college. Pride swelled in her chest. She taught her children that education and hard work mattered more than other people's opinions, and they were proving her right. Her daughter's success gave her an extra boost of confidence about her own secret studies. Back at work, she pushed her cart past the office of Mr. Peters, the operations manager who'd made the right kind of people comment earlier. His trash can was overflowing with crumpled papers. Failed attempts at solving the company's mounting problems. She knew every one of those problems intimately. After all, she was the one cleaning up their messes, both literally and figuratively. As she worked, she mentally reviewed her own business plan. For months, she'd been documenting everything: the wasteful cleaning protocols, the ignored maintenance issues, the inefficient scheduling. She'd also been quietly building relationships with other cleaning staff at neighboring buildings, learning about their struggles and ideas for improvement. Near the end of her shift, while mopping the lobby, she overheard two executives in panic mode. Their biggest client, Standard Industries, was threatening to cancel their contract due to poor building maintenance. Mrs. Taylor kept mopping, but her mind was racing. She knew exactly why Standard Industries was unhappy. She cleaned their offices too, and had watched the quality decline under current management. That evening, instead of heading straight home, she stopped at the library. As she polished her business proposal, she thought about all the times they'd overlooked her suggestions, ignored her presence, or spoken about her like she wasn't even human. But she wasn't angry. She was determined. Her proposal wasn't just about cleaning services. It was about dignity, respect, and proving that the right kind of people weren't always who you'd expect. She'd built something better, something that would change everything. Tomorrow, she decided, she would make her move. After 15 years of being invisible, it was time to be seen. Looking at her reflection in the library window, Mrs. Taylor saw what they never bothered to see: a businesswoman, a leader, and someone who was about to teach them all a valuable lesson about judging people by their job title. What the executives at Crystal Clear Corp never realized was that their cleaning lady had become their most valuable unknown asset. Every morning, while they slept in their comfortable homes, Mrs. Taylor was building something extraordinary. In the quiet hours before dawn, she'd take photos of the moldy spots they ignored in the basement. She documented the overflowing dumpsters that violated city codes. Her phone was filled with time-stamped evidence of every cleaning standard they dropped in their rush to cut costs. But she didn't just collect problems. She gathered solutions. When the drinking fountain on the 3rd floor kept breaking, she figured out it wasn't the fountain at all. It was a pipe issue that maintenance kept misdiagnosing. She wrote it all down in her notebook, along with an estimate of how much money they were wasting on repeated repairs. One morning, she arrived to find the night shift had quit without warning. Instead of panicking like the facility manager, she quietly pulled out her contact list. These were people she'd met at the bus stop, chatted with at the grocery store, or worked with at other buildings. Within an hour, she had 3 experienced cleaners filling in. The facility manager never even knew there had been a problem. Her secret weapon wasn't just her knowledge of the building's problems. It was her understanding of its people. She knew that Ms. Chen in accounting always worked late on Thursdays, so she saved cleaning that office for last. She knew Mr. Rodriguez from it was allergic to certain cleaning products, so she used only natural alternatives in his area. These small details, which the management company ignored, made all the difference. During her lunch break, she'd sit in her car and work on her business plan. She had spreadsheets showing exactly how much money was being wasted on inefficient cleaning schedules. She had detailed proposals for green cleaning solutions that would save money and improve air quality. She even had letters of support from other cleaning staff who were ready to join her company. The building's security cameras caught her taking notes and pictures, but the guards knew her too well to be suspicious. "Just documenting the cleaning supplies we need," she'd say with a smile. They had no idea she was actually building a complete operations manual for a better cleaning company. One day, while cleaning the executive bathroom, she overheard 2 managers complaining about the rising costs of their cleaning service. She smiled to herself, knowing her company could do the job for 30% less while paying workers more. It wasn't magic. It was just good business sense combined with actual cleaning experience. She kept track of every complaint, every maintenance request, and every inspection report. In her home office, she had files full of certification requirements and city regulations. She knew exactly which rules the current company was breaking and how to fix them properly. The real surprise was in her networking. During her daily rounds, she'd built relationships with everyone from parking attendants to top executives' assistants. These connections weren't just friendly chats. They were the foundation of her future business. The security guard who'd watched her arrive early every morning for 15 years had already promised to recommend her company to other buildings in his rotation. At night, after helping her kids with their homework, she'd work on her pricing models. She understood the true cost of everything, from cleaning supplies to worker benefits. Her plans included health insurance for all employees and educational assistance programs. She knew from experience that valued workers did better work. The current management had no idea that their invisible cleaning lady had created the solution to all their problems. She had process documents, training manuals, and quality control systems all ready to go. Every time they ignored her greeting in the hallway, they were overlooking the very person who could save their biggest contracts. As she finished her shift that evening, Mrs. Taylor looked around the gleaming lobby she just cleaned. Soon, she wouldn't be just maintaining this space. She'd be transforming how it was maintained. She'd turned 15 years of being underestimated into the perfect business opportunity, and not one of those executives had seen it coming. The moment Mrs. Taylor had been waiting for arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was cleaning near the executive conference room when she heard raised voices inside. Through the gap under the door, she could see several pairs of expensive shoes pacing nervously. "Standard Industries is giving us until the end of the month," a deep voice boomed. "If we don't improve the building's maintenance, they're pulling their entire contract. That's 6 floors of rent, gone." The sound of fist hitting the table made her cleaning bottles rattle. Mrs. Taylor kept wiping the windows, but her heart was racing. Standard Industries wasn't just any client. They were the backbone of Crystal Clear Corp's income. She remembered the day they'd moved in 3 years ago. She'd helped set up their offices, learned their employees' names, understood their specific needs. During her lunch break, she sat in her car and pulled out her proposal folder. Inside was everything she'd prepared for this exact moment: cost breakdowns, staffing plans, green cleaning initiatives, and testimonials from other cleaning staff ready to join her company. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the numbers one last time. Back inside, she noticed Mr. Wilson, the building manager, had left his computer unlocked again. On the screen was an email from Standard Industries' CEO. It detailed everything Mrs. Taylor had documented over the past year: dirty windows, overflowing trash bins, dusty air vents, and bathrooms that weren't being properly sanitized. She thought about all the times she tried to report these issues. The maintenance request forms she'd filled out that were ignored. The suggestions she'd made that were dismissed with a patronizing smile. Now their biggest client was noticing the same problems. That afternoon, she watched the executives rush in and out of emergency meetings. Their faces were grim, their shirts wrinkled from stress. None of them noticed her quietly cleaning nearby, just as they hadn't noticed her quietly building the solution to their problems all these years. Mrs. Taylor took a deep breath and walked to the front desk. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with the board of directors," she told the receptionist. The young woman looked up, surprised to hear such a request from a cleaning lady. But Mrs. Taylor had built a friendship with her over countless early mornings, sharing coffee and stories about their families. "It's about Standard Industries," Mrs. Taylor added softly. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. After a moment's hesitation, she checked the calendar. "There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. They've cleared the whole morning." She glanced around and lowered her voice. "I could add you to the agenda. First thought." That evening, Mrs. Taylor stayed late, making sure every surface in the boardroom gleamed. She arranged 15 copies of her proposal in pristine folders. Each one contained her vision for a better cleaning service, one that treated both clients and workers with respect. At home, she laid out her best outfit. A navy blue suit she'd bought secondhand, but had perfectly tailored. Her daughter helped her prepare her presentation, filming her practice runs and offering suggestions. Her son printed extra copies of the financial projections just in case. As she ironed her clothes, Mrs. Taylor thought about how far she'd come. From her first day as a cleaning lady to now, preparing to offer a solution that could save the company millions. She remembered every dismissive comment, every time someone had looked through her like she was invisible. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, they would have to see her. Not as the cleaning lady they'd mocked, but as the businesswoman who could solve their biggest problem. She packed her bag with everything she'd need: proposal folders, presentation notes, and 15 years' worth of determination. That night, she barely slept, but it wasn't from nervousness. It was excitement. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as problems, and she had spent years preparing for this one. As she finally drifted off, she smiled, knowing that tomorrow would change everything, not just for her, but for every overlooked worker who had ever dreamed of something bigger. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Mrs. Taylor walked into Crystal Clear Corp looking nothing like the cleaning lady everyone knew. Her navy blue suit was pressed perfectly. Her small gold earrings caught the morning light, and her stance radiated quiet confidence. The security guard did a double take, then broke into a proud grin. "Today's the day, isn't it?" he asked. She nodded, patting her leather portfolio. The elevator ride to the top floor felt different this morning. Usually, she rode with her cleaning cart, pressed into the corner while executives tapped on their phones, ignoring her presence. Today, she stood tall in the center, her heartbeat steady and sure. The receptionist winked encouragingly as Mrs. Taylor walked past. The boardroom doors were already open, and the smell of coffee and anxiety filled the air. Board members were settling into their leather chairs, their faces tense with concern about the Standard Industries crisis. "Excuse me," one executive said dismissively, barely glancing at her. "The cleaning can wait. We have an important meeting." Mrs. Taylor didn't move. Instead, she pulled out her business card, simple, professional, with her name and CEO, Excellence Cleaning Solutions, printed beneath it. "On your 9 a.m. appointment," she said, her voice clear and confident. The room fell silent. She could see the confusion on their faces, the slow recognition as they realized the cleaning lady they'd overlooked for 15 years was standing before them in a business suit. The board chairman recovered first, gesturing to an empty seat. "Please sit down." His voice carried a mix of surprise and curiosity. As Mrs. Taylor arranged her materials, she noticed some executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. These were the same ones who'd made those racist comments in the break room last week. She began her presentation with a simple truth. Gentlemen, I know why Standard Industries is unhappy. She laid out the problems one by one, not from reports or surveys, but from first-hand experience. She described the exact spots where cleaning had been neglected, the corners that had been cut, the standards that had slipped. Then came her solutions. Her hands moved confidently as she distributed her proposal folders. My company can solve these issues while reducing your costs by 30%. She walked them through her detailed plans. Proper staffing levels, green cleaning protocols, quality control measures. When one board member interrupted with a skeptical question about her experience, Mrs. Taylor calmly opened her laptop. Let me show you something. She played a video testimonial from the night cleaning crew she'd helped during last month's crisis. Then another from a Standard Industries employee praising her work ethic. The room grew quieter as she continued. She showed them her certifications in business management and sustainable cleaning practices. She presented letters of intent from experienced cleaning staff ready to join her company. Her graphs demonstrated exactly how much money they were wasting with their current service. But what makes you think you can handle a contract this size? Asked the CFO, leaning forward. Mrs. Taylor smiled. This was the question she'd been waiting for. She pulled out her final document, proof that she'd already secured contracts with 2 smaller buildings in the area. Her test runs had been successful, and her references were impeccable. The presentation lasted exactly 30 minutes. As she concluded, the silence in the room felt different from the dismissive silence she'd known for years. This was the silence of people realizing they'd underestimated someone badly. The board chairman cleared his throat. Mrs. Taylor, could you step outside for a moment while we discuss this? She gathered her materials calmly, knowing she'd done everything possible to prepare for this moment. As she walked to the door, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. No longer invisible, no longer overlooked. In the hallway, she watched the morning sun paint the city skyline. Somewhere in that building, Standard Industries executives were probably sitting in their offices, unaware that their cleaning lady had just offered the solution to save their contract. Sometimes, she thought, the best view of a broken system comes from the bottom up. The board's discussion lasted longer than anyone expected. Through the boardroom's glass walls, Mrs. Taylor could see animated conversations and gesturing hands. She sat quietly in the waiting area, remembering all the times she'd cleaned those same glass walls while being completely invisible to the people behind them. After 45 minutes, the receptionist called her back in. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted dramatically. Gone were the condescending smirks and dismissive glances. Instead, the board members looked at her with new eyes, some impressed, others slightly uncomfortable. The board chairman stood up, holding her proposal in his hands. Mrs. Taylor, your presentation was enlightening. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You've shown us some serious problems we weren't aware of. But more importantly, you've offered solutions we hadn't considered. One by one, board members began asking questions. Real questions this time, not the dismissive ones from earlier. How quickly could she start? What changes would she make first? How would she handle the transition? Mrs. Taylor answered each question with the confidence that comes from years of hands-on experience. Your cost analysis is particularly interesting, the CFO said, flipping through her numbers. You're saying you can provide better service while paying workers more and saving us money. Mrs. Taylor nodded, pulling out her detailed budget breakdowns. She showed them exactly where the current company was wasting money: unnecessary equipment, inefficient scheduling, poor training practices. Then came the moment that made several executives shift uncomfortably in their seats. She pulled out documented evidence of health code violations, safety oversights, and labor law infractions she'd witnessed over the years. These aren't just problems, she explained calmly. They're opportunities for improvement. The board chairman leaned forward. Mrs. Taylor, we need to be direct here. Some of these issues you've documented, they're serious. Why didn't you bring them up before? The room fell silent, waiting for her response. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. I tried, she said simply. For 15 years, I submitted maintenance requests. I made suggestions. I spoke to supervisors. But when you're seen as just the cleaning lady, people don't listen. Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The atmosphere in the room changed again. Some board members looked down at their hands, perhaps remembering times they'd walked past her without a word. Others nodded slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of what they'd overlooked. Your proposal includes benefits for all employees, noted one board member. Health insurance, educational assistance, career development programs. That's unusual in the cleaning industry. Mrs. Taylor smiled. Happy workers do better work, she replied. I know because I've been one, both happy and unhappy. The board chairman cleared his throat. Mrs. Taylor, would you be willing to take on the Standard Industries contract as a test run? 3 months to prove your model works? She was ready for this question. From her portfolio, she pulled out a pre-prepared contract, complete with performance metrics and quality guarantees. I can start next week, she said, and I won't need 3 months. Give me 1 month to show you the difference. Her confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the solid certainty of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and how to do it. As the meeting wrapped up, one of the younger board members approached her. I've worked here for 5 years, he said quietly. I must have walked past you 100 times without really seeing you. I'm sorry about that. Mrs. Taylor gave him a gentle smile. The important thing, she replied, is what we see now. Walking out of the boardroom, Mrs. Taylor felt different. Not because she'd won their respect, though she had, but because she'd stayed true to herself while doing it. She hadn't needed to become someone else to succeed. She'd simply needed the chance to show who she'd been all along. The morning sun was high now, streaming through those freshly cleaned windows. In a few hours, she'd go home and tell her children about this day. But first, she had something important to do. Thank the security guard, the receptionist, and all the others who'd seen her worth long before the board did. Word spread quickly through Crystal Clear Corp about what had happened in the boardroom. By lunchtime, the whole building was buzzing with the news that their longtime cleaning lady was about to become their new cleaning services provider. The same executives who used to walk past her without a glance were now nervously smiling when they saw her. Mrs. Taylor went about her usual cleaning routine that day, but everything felt different. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she overheard whispered conversations. Did you hear? One office worker said to another. She had documentation of everything. Every single thing they did wrong for years. The facilities manager, who had dismissed so many of her maintenance requests, now hovered anxiously near her cart. About those broken soap dispensers in the third-floor bathroom, he stammered. I can have those fixed right away. Mrs. Taylor simply nodded, checking the item off her long list of improvements to make. During her afternoon break, she sat in the small break room where cleaning staff usually ate alone. Today, several office workers joined her, asking about her plans for the company. She shared her vision of fair wages, proper training, and respect for every worker. When people feel valued, she explained, stirring her coffee, they do valuable work. The executives who had made those awful comments in the conference room now found themselves in an uncomfortable position. One of them tried to explain himself, catching her in the hallway. About what you might have overheard last week, he began. Mrs. Taylor cut him off politely but firmly. Let's focus on moving forward, she said. Actions speak louder than words. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from her future employees. Other cleaning staff who had heard about her success and wanted to join her company. They saw hope in her story. If a cleaning lady could transform into a business owner through hard work and determination, maybe they could rise too. The Standard Industries executives were surprised to find her cleaning their offices that afternoon. "Shouldn't you be celebrating?" one of them asked. Mrs. Taylor smiled as she carefully dusted their awards shelf. "The best way to celebrate is to keep doing good work," she replied. "Besides, I want to make sure everything is perfect for when my team takes over next week." Later that day, she met with the HR department to discuss the transition. The same people who had processed her minimum wage paperwork for years now sat across from her, reviewing her company's benefits package. Her employees would have health insurance, paid time off, and educational assistance, things she had gone without for too long. In the executive bathroom, the one she cleaned thousands of times, she overheard two managers discussing her proposal. "Did you see her profit projections?" one whispered. "She'll make more than some of us." Mrs. Taylor smiled to herself as she refilled the paper towels. Money wasn't her main goal, but it felt good to know her years of careful planning would pay off. The security guard caught her eye as she did her final rounds that evening. "You showed them," he said proudly. "You showed them that wisdom can come from anywhere." She thought about his words as she checked the last offices. She hadn't just shown them what she could do. She'd shown them what they had missed by judging people by their job titles. As the sun set over the city skyline, Mrs. Taylor took one last look around the building she'd cared for all these years. Tomorrow, she would return not as the cleaning lady they had overlooked, but as the CEO they now relied on. The power hadn't really shifted. It had simply become visible. Walking to her car, she passed the expensive vehicles belonging to the executives. Soon, her old Honda would be replaced with something newer, but she planned to keep it as a reminder. Success wasn't about changing who you were. It was about being recognized for who you'd always been. Within a month, the changes at Crystal Clear Corp were impossible to ignore. The building literally sparkled. Windows gleamed in the morning sun, floors shone like mirrors, and the air smelled fresh and clean. But the biggest change wasn't in the building, it was in the people. Mrs. Taylor's cleaning team moved through the offices with pride. They wore neat uniforms with their names displayed, and everyone in the building knew who they were. No more invisible workers, no more ignored greetings. Each cleaner had proper training, proper equipment, and proper respect. The Standard Industries executives were the first to notice the difference. "It's not just cleaner," one manager commented during their monthly review. "The whole atmosphere has changed." He was right. When employees came to work now, they found their offices spotless, their special requests remembered, their workspaces cared for with attention to detail. One morning, Mrs. Taylor led a training session in the same conference room where she'd once been mocked. New employees sat attentively as she shared her knowledge. "We're not just cleaning rooms," she explained. "We're creating environments where people can do their best work." The irony wasn't lost on the executives passing by. They now stopped to listen to her wisdom. The changes went beyond clean floors and empty trash bins. Her team had installed energy-efficient lighting, environmentally friendly cleaning supplies, and a new recycling system that saved the company thousands. The building's expenses had dropped exactly as she promised in her proposal. Word spread to other buildings in the business district. Property managers started calling, asking about her services. "How do you get such good results?" They wanted to know. Mrs. Taylor's answer was always the same. "I treat my workers like professionals, so they work like professionals." Her children visited the building one afternoon after school. They stood in the lobby, proud tears in their eyes, as they watched their mother direct her growing team. The security guard who'd encouraged her for years smiled as he issued them visitor badges. "Your mom," he told them. "She changed everything around here." The transformation wasn't just in the workplace. Her employees' lives were changing too. One young cleaner enrolled in night classes, inspired by Mrs. Taylor's story. Another was able to move to a better apartment, thanks to the living wage she now earned. A third finally got the medical care he'd been putting off, covered by his new health insurance. Even the most skeptical executives had to admit she delivered on every promise. The building's maintenance costs were down, employee satisfaction was up, and Standard Industries had not only stayed but recommended her company to other businesses. During a budget meeting, the CFO presented the numbers. Mrs. Taylor's company has saved us 34% on cleaning costs, he announced, and complaints about building maintenance have dropped to zero. The board members who'd once dismissed her now quoted her business strategies. She kept her office simple, just a small space near the maintenance area. I need to stay close to the work, she explained when offered a fancy corner office. Her door was always open to her employees, who came to her with ideas and suggestions. Unlike the previous management, she listened. One day, she found a letter on her desk from a young office worker. I used to dream of starting my own business, it read, but I thought people like me couldn't do it. You showed me we can. Mrs. Taylor pinned it to her wall, next to her business degree and company certificates. The old Honda still sat in the parking lot, though now it had company, a small fleet of eco-friendly vans with her company's logo. She kept her car as a reminder of where she'd started and how far she'd come. Success doesn't mean forgetting your roots, she told her team. It means using them to grow stronger. As the sun set over the city, Mrs. Taylor walked through her building one last time before heading home. The evening cleaning crew greeted her by name, sharing updates and ideas. This was more than just a cleaning company now. It was proof that when you give people dignity and opportunity, amazing things happen. 1 year had passed since that life-changing board meeting. Mrs. Taylor stood at the podium of the city's small business conference, looking out at a sea of eager faces. The same executives who once ignored her now sat in the audience, taking notes as she spoke about transforming workplace culture. Her company had grown beyond anyone's expectations. From that first contract with Crystal Clear Corp, she now managed cleaning services for 12 major buildings downtown. But more important than the growth was the change she created in the industry. Success isn't just about profits, she told the audience, her voice steady and sure. It's about lifting others as you climb. She shared stories of her employees, the single mother who'd finished her degree while working on her team, the immigrant worker who'd opened his own small business with her guidance, the elderly cleaner who could finally retire with dignity thanks to the retirement plan she put in place. Back at Crystal Clear Corp, things had changed in ways nobody expected. The old divisions between office workers and cleaning staff had faded away. Now, morning greetings were exchanged with genuine warmth. Cleaning team members were invited to office parties. Their names were known, their contributions valued. The building's lobby now displayed a wall of recognition, featuring employees from all levels who'd made outstanding contributions. Right in the center was a photo of Mrs. Taylor from her days as a cleaning lady, next to her current photo as CEO. Below it was a simple quote, "Look past the uniform to see the person." Her children had learned powerful lessons from their mother's journey. Her daughter, now in business school herself, often brought classmates to hear her mother speak. "My mom taught me that education comes in many forms," she'd tell them. She got her business degree at night, but she earned her PhD in human nature by being invisible for 15 years. The executives who'd once made those horrible comments had either changed their ways or found themselves replaced. The new company culture had no room for discrimination or disrespect. As Mrs. Taylor often said, toxic behavior is the only dirt we can't clean up. It has to be prevented. Her business model had become a case study at the local university. Students learned how she turned basic principles, respect, fair wages, and professional development into a successful enterprise. The professor who taught the course had once worked in Crystal Clear Corp and remembered how she used to clean his office with quiet dignity. On this particular morning, Mrs. Taylor walked through her original building, now just one of many under her company's care. The security guard, who'd supported her from the beginning, was retiring, and she'd come to his farewell party. "Remember when you used to sneak study breaks in the security office?" he asked with a smile. "Now look at you." Her office remained in the maintenance area, though she now had branches across the city. Leadership should never lose touch with the daily work, she'd say. Every new employee still went through her training program, learning not just about cleaning techniques, but about dignity, respect, and the possibility of growth. The old Honda was finally retired, donated to a program helping workers get to their jobs. But she kept a photo of it on her desk, next to the family pictures and business awards. It reminded her of early morning drives to work, of dreams planned in parking lots, of a time when determination was her only capital. As the afternoon sun streamed through the spotless windows of Crystal Clear Corp., Mrs. Taylor watched her newest team of cleaners at work. They moved with pride, their uniforms neat, their equipment state-of-the-art. Each one knew they could rise in the company through hard work and dedication. She'd made sure of that. The best revenge, she thought, watching the busy office around her, isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. She'd done more than build a successful business. She'd created a model of how things could be, should be, in every workplace. The invisible had become invincible, and the whole city was better for it.